Yeah, following that's going to leave a scar, isn't it? I believe in the concept of invisible scars, and I hold out my evidence for that, the Good Sisters of the Immaculate Heart of Mary. And I know some of you, yeah, you know what I'm talking about, right? I am not going to paint with a broad brush. I was taught very many very good things by the nuns who taught me in grade school. But there's one in particular I'd like to talk about tonight. She taught me about invisible scars. Sister Mary of Bethany. I was in the 4th grade, and to start a particular grammar lesson one day, Sister Mary of Bethany spouted a word. My memory won't let me remember what that word is. And she asked what part of speech it was. And she started with the first person in the first row who guessed wrong, and the second person who guessed wrong, and the third person, down and down. I sat in the first seat in the second row, which we used to call arm's length. And when I guessed incorrectly myself, she grabbed me by the necktie and collar and shook me and told everyone in the classroom that we'd all be failures. I ended up with a scar. Little cut on my neck, my tie was broken, my shirt was ripped, and my mother was very upset when I got home. But in my parents' generation, when you got in trouble with the teachers at school, you got in trouble at home for getting in trouble with the teachers at school, right? And my mother tried to call up to find out what happened, and good Sister Mary Bethany said she never touched Peter. She doesn't know what I'm talking about, right? So my mother was not very pleased with that because she believed me. When my father got home and he heard the story, he decided to drive over to the convent to visit the good sisters. I was not party to the final negotiated settlement. There was no apology included in that settlement, I know that. There was no acknowledgement of what happened. There was an orange safety badge, an honorary member as a safety, and a ticket to the Phillies game that the safeties got to go to at the end of the year. So my father did a really good job negotiating this for me, right? Much better than he would have gotten his day. So at that point, I got to think, you know, there's this thing, there's scars that you can get. I'm going to go forward 20 whole years. My friend Turk, who was in my school with me at that time, was ordained a priest. And I flew down from Boston to be at his ordination. And it was a great ceremony, and afterwards there was a party. And I sat down at a table at the reception next to a young, relatively young, she was my age at the time, sister of the Immaculate Heart of Mary, right? And I knew she couldn't have been one of the teachers, one of my abusers, because she was young. And she said, "How do you know Father?" And I said, "We were classmates in grade school." And she said, "Oh, you probably know a lot of the sisters here today." And I said, "You know, I'm looking around, I don't recognize anyone." She said, "Right at the next table, that's Sister," and she gave a name, and it didn't register. I said, that doesn't, oh, that's her name she uses now. Back then, they used to have their ordination names, whatever, they're a different name. That's Sister Mary of Bethany. And I don't know if it was a full duck and cover, but my response was so visceral that this young nun just started laughing. She said, "We get a lot of that with her." And that's when I knew there probably were things called invisible scars. I want to flash forward 10 more years now. Around 10 years ago, I had this lump on the back of my head, and it started to bother my wife. She said, "You got to get that thing tied." It's always been there. It's always been the same size. And it got to the point where I realized, no, this thing's getting bigger. So I went to see a dermatologist, and she panicked. This is bad, right? I'm not going to touch that. I said, "Well, what do I do?" She said, "You need to go to a surgeon and get it removed. They'll probably want to do a consultation. They'll probably bring you to a hospital, put you under." And she had me fairly scared about this thing that I didn't know what it was. And I said, "Okay, what kind of doctor do you go to for that?" And she said, "Either a general surgeon or a plastic surgeon." And I hope that if there are any general surgeons in here tonight, I apologize. But the term general surgeon sounds like the person who finished last in med school, right? All the good things were taken. Yeah, okay, I got a knife, yeah, coming over, right? So I decided to go to a plastic surgeon, and I scheduled an appointment. It was right near my office, and I didn't think twice about it until I was driving over a couple weeks later. And in the car, I'm thinking, I'm a 40-year-old guy living on the main line, and I'm about to go to a plastic surgeon. This is the vanity that the nuns warned me about. I shouldn't be doing it. I thought this was like a gateway procedure, right? I'd go in for this thing, and next thing you know, it's a jawline or something. And I was really feeling guilt about that. I was like, I can't believe I'm going to a plastic surgeon. And I pull in the parking lot, and I walk into the building, and I'm getting ready to fill out my forms, and I look, and I'm not making this up, there were 2 sisters of the Immaculate Heart of Mary sitting in the waiting room, and everything. Oh, I felt so good at that point, because if they can do it, so can I, right? Nothing vain about this whatsoever. And I waited my turn, and I went in, and the nurse came in and said, "Tell me what's going on." I showed it to her, and she said, "Fine, doctor will be in a while." And he came in, he took one look at me, he said, "You are a brave man." I said, "Doctor, I don't know what you're talking about." He said, "You wore a white shirt to surgery." And I said, "Wait, surgery? No, I think I'm here for a consult." So I told him the story, and he said, no, I'm just going to take that out right here." I said, "Well, you can take it out here, but you're going to have to biopsy it, because if you just take it out and I can't tell my wife what it was, I'll be back for reconstructive surgery next week, right?" So I said, fine, we'll do that, but let me just numb your head up." So we put some needles back here, and for the first time, I really was a numbskull. I'd been accused of that many a time in the past. And we were sitting there waiting for it to get numb, and I told him the story about the nuns. And he said to me, he said, "You know, that's kind of funny." He said, "A couple days a week I go over to Immaculata, and I donate my time there. I do a lot of work over there. And I mentioned there's one particular nun that if his scalpel happened to slip, it wouldn't be the end of the world." And that's when I knew there was such a thing as invisible scars. Thank you.